Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We have Simon Says, the host of Simon Time Trivia, facebook.com/Simon Time Trivia, and we're going to be debating how talented is Vince Russo. Simon, why don't you say hello to everyone and introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. Super excited and beyond thrilled to be a part of this. Thank you so much to SnowMan for having me on and allowing me to engage in these subjects about a world that I adore with all of my being, professional wrestling.
All right, so we asked the fans of jrsvideos.com, what would they like to see? What debate? We're the first that I know of online podcast that is doing wrestling debates of topical topics. And 33% of our fans, of 2,000 votes, said they want us to debate how good and bad Vince Russo is. That beat out should The Undertaker retire with 28%, should Chris Benoit be in the Hall of Fame with 24%, and should Owen Hart be in the Hall of Fame that received 16%. So that's our topic today. I will kick it off and start the argument. And again, if you'd like to know more about Simon Says, professional wrestler and trivia host, check out facebook.com/Simon Time Trivia. You ready to kick it off, Simon?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I will start off with saying that I know for a fact that this is not going to be a popular opinion. We have a lot of people that are cult of Cornette and a lot of people who do not like Vince Russo, so I'm going to lose the popularity contest here.
However, you definitely have an uphill climb here, Snowman. You definitely have an uphill climb.
All right, so I'll kick it off right now. So, why do I think that Vince Russo was so talented? And here's my argument. That Vince Russo was the most influential writer in WWE history, and he is extremely talented. Let me give you 5 examples. The formation of D-Generation X, the Austin versus McMahon feud, 3 Faces of Foley, the rise of The Rock to superstardom, and Booker T as WCW champion, his rise as a champion. Those are 5 examples of Vince Russo at his best. Vince Russo was put on the creative team in WWE in 1996. From 1997 to 1999, he and Vince McMahon, he was the head writer, and Vince McMahon was his partner in crime. There's never been better wrestling TV before or since that time. He wrote every episode of Raw from start to finish in WWE's best era, best written, best ratings. That all is on account of Vince Russo's talent. So I know he is not popular. I'm not going to win a popularity contest. You may bring up Owen Hart. You may bring up Brawl for All. That's not the point. I'm saying he's the most talented writer in WWE history, and based on ratings and popularity of wrestling, that era in 1997 was everybody's favorite era, and I can prove that when I asked our fans, 3,500 people on the page, we asked them what era was their favorite. 60% said the late 1990s. Out of 3,500 people, as much as people want to hate Vince Russo and rewrite history, they absolutely love the era that he wasn't on TV, but he was writing it. So that's my argument. And Simon Says, I will turn it over to you for your counterpoint.
No, man, I'm going to start this off by saying, number one, I'm not going to base my stance on anything personal, both about my interactions with Vince Russo. As you said at the top of the podcast, I am a professional wrestler. I trained at the FXC Pro Wrestling Academy here in Orlando, Florida, which was the precursor to the Team 3D Pro Wrestling Academy. I was a member of the inaugural class, and I was lucky enough to have made my way there through working at TNA. So I was there when Vince Russo arrived, and I had many interactions with him, Scott D'Amore and the guys. And I don't mean to name drop, but I wanted to come off as that. I just want this to be the basis for what I'm about to say. They nicknamed me Vinny Roo because I guess I had a resemblance to him, so I had an attachment there. I'm going to steer away from using my personal interactions with him. I'm also not going to talk about the Owen Hart thing. I don't think this is the time or the place. That being said, you mentioned that Vince Russo was instrumental because of his ratings during the Attitude Era. However, you also have to factor in the sheer amount of overwhelming and glaring talent that was on the roster. I'm going to quick point my stances on the argument as follows. Number one, he was good when he had a governing body. As you said, he wrote during the Attitude Era, but he had Vince McMahon to weed out the good and the bad. He didn't have that in WCW, and he definitely didn't have that in TNA, and look what happened. We got things like the Last Rites match. He booked himself to win the WCW title. Judy Bagwell and Viagra on the pole matches. The Goldberg heel was disastrous, which people could equate also similarly to the Stone Cold heel turn, but that's neither here nor there. In the WWE, he gave us stuff like Beaver Cleavage, the Mark Henry and the transvestite angle, and he turned Dustin Rhodes into Seven, which Dustin has openly discussed hating. His Crash TV, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks attitude, you're bound to have a good idea, Snowman. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut. You've heard that saying before. He had some of the world's best talent to work with during the Attitude Era. Stone Cold, The Undertaker, The Rock, a virtual Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling stars. The Attitude Era, ratings-wise, prior to that, everything was in the toilet. You came from the occupational-based gimmicks, the super hokey WWE. The fans were begging for anything else. He had good ideas. I'm not saying he never did, but I think the proof is in the pudding with trying to recycle the ideas that once worked. We know the Montreal Screwjob is one of the most talked about happenings in wrestling. If anybody's watched the recent Dark Side of the Ring series, the Montreal Screwjob one, Cornette takes credit for it. Vince Russo takes credit for it. Russo did provide us a great storyline in Survivor Series 1998 with The Rock's heel turn, but again, he had Vince McMahon there to weed out the good and the bad. He tried to recopy the formula with Brett Goldberg and Piper in WCW, and it was a disaster. But my final point, I'm not going to talk about anything personal, my interactions or him so much as a person, because you can be a terrible person and still be influential and talented. I will say, though, he's proven his pettiness. He obviously doesn't care too much about the well-being of the wrestlers. You mentioned the Brawl for All. He pitched the Brawl for All just to spite John Bradshaw Layfield, who I know is a loudmouth, who I know is a bully, and that's coming from someone who professionally, I am a huge JBL fan. And if that's not enough, look at the Oklahoma character he and Ed Ferreira orchestrated. Yes, Vince McMahon has made fun of JR countless times, but they've had a relationship. I interpret it as he's my buddy. I can make fun of him, but you can't. The one thing Vince McMahon never did, though, was mock Jim Ross's belt palsy extensively the way that Ed Ferreira and Vince Russo did on WCW TV. Vince has done it a time here or there, but I think it's a completely apples and oranges situation.
Okay, fair enough. Now, let me go ahead and take the stage for a moment here. And again, my argument being that Vince Russo was the most influential writer, and he was extremely talented. And we have to look at what was going on in WWE before Vince Russo. And you pointed out, it's night and day. The occupational gimmicks, things like Max Moon, Aldo Montoya, Avatar, The Goon, T.L. Hopper, Who, the New Generation, as they were called in the early 90s. It was a bunch of guys from Smoky Mountain Wrestling and USWA put into horrible gimmicks that Vince McMahon seemed to think would get over, and it was trash. Now then you skip ahead, and Vince Russo came in and he made WWE Raw Magazine, where it made a real competitive feeling, and it was amazing. You had angles like he wrote Mark Marrow being jealous of Sable's popularity, and that was huge. It made her the most popular wrestling woman in WWE history based on ratings and T-shirt sales. He came up with two guys who were basically jobbers, made them too cool, and they were over. They main evented Raw one time. The Corporate Rock, being a heel, made The Rock into a bona fide superstar in his feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin. That was all Vince Russo. And the bottom line is nobody wants to give him credit for what he did because he's an asshole. Nobody likes Vince Russo. Jim Cornette doesn't like him. Jim Ross doesn't really say it, but clearly doesn't like him. Nobody likes Vince Russo. Fans jump on that bandwagon. But you can't rewrite history and say that he didn't develop and come up with 90% of the writing for the Gold Dust gimmick. The original Gold Dust stuff was all Vince Russo. the and there'll be fans who will argue some of that, and that's fine because a lot of it is a group effort. Raw Magazine, like I said, and in 2002 when he came back and consulted, he was the one who said Eric Bischoff needs to be in charge of Vince McMahon, and it was a huge angle. So even little things, I know if you want to argue that WCW is crash and burn, trash exposure in WCW, that should have never happened. That was WCW's fault. That was giving a kid the keys to the toy store. He should have never been in charge. He didn't have any idea what he was doing. He was a writer that they put in charge of the entire company. He was an idiot. But when it comes to being a great writer, he was among the best of all time. And that's my argument.
You mentioned a lot of different points in your rebuttal there, SnowMan.
Sorry, I was all over the place. Go ahead.
No. I love it. You mentioned guys that he put into prominent spots, guys like Sable. Let's not forget the main point here is he did all this while he had people weeding out his ideas. I'm not saying Vince Russo didn't have good ideas. I'm just saying that he needs a filter. He was filterless in WCW, and we got his stable, his championship run, him going to business for himself and publicly firing Hulk Hogan on pay-per-view, completely unscripted. And then, like I said, TNA, that was just a train wreck people could not look away from. He did have a hand in the Goldust gimmick, but then look what he did. He recopied it. He constantly tried and wanted to have Dustin Rhodes in these macabre, outre, out there kind of characters, and he just couldn't revisit the glory. A lot of his stuff is rehashing stuff that worked before and not based in originality. The Rock heel turn was something I mentioned as one of his greatest works, but Vince McMahon was instrumental both behind the scenes and in the storyline itself. Right. Vince Russo, without someone to reel him in, without a governor, as they say, is just a train wreck of ideas.
Okay. Well, and if you're okay to open up for just discussion at this point, and we'd ask all the fans to leave their comments and opinions below, because we'd love to hear from you. And like I said, I know there's a lot of people who hate Vince Russo just based on his personality, so I expect a lot of people to voice that, and that's fair. I think there's two pieces we need to dissect here, and one is he was the writer in WWE TV, and he was an idea man for Vince McMahon. So when he went to WCW and had to do everything, including sign talent and figure out who's going to be over in every part of it and put himself on, he was in over his head. He was awful. We all know that. But as a writer, if you just put him in a room and say, write what people are going to do and give them an idea and work with them and come up with, whether it's gimmicks for The Godfather or Val Venus, and help them come up with their promos and produce and write, he was great. Now, if he needs to be in charge of the entire company, no, he wasn't that great. But he kind of had two roles. One was writer and one was idea man, and he was good at both of those, but he just didn't need to be everything. He wasn't Vince McMahon, and that's where Turner screwed up.
See, I'm a firm believer. The Attitude Era is my favorite time in wrestling, as I'm sure a lot of the listeners of this show would agree. Yes, he did have multiple ideas that worked in the Attitude Era, but can you really disagree that almost anything in the Attitude Era was bound to work at the time because of how hot the business was? I would argue that guys like Bruce Pritchard are better writers than Vince Russo, because in the time when things were so bad with the occupational, hokey, cartoony gimmicks, they were still able to crank out stuff that was intriguing. The big boss man feud with Hulk Hogan, just to name one out of dozens. Guys like Brian Gewirtz also had a huge hand in making things like Edge and Christian work. So there are a plenty of other names that we could throw out there for writers that made work with less to work with.
Yeah. Well, and I want to kind of piggyback on an idea, is that Vince Russo probably wouldn't be a good writer today. Because when he was probably in his 20s or 30s, I don't know his exact age, he was in touch with pop culture. He was listening to Howard Stern, came up with the oddities off of Howard Stern's show. He came up and said, hey, ICP's hot, let's bring them in. Hey, grunge music, let's use that. Let's use whatever. Let's use an anti-hero like Stone Cold Steve Austin, and he ran with those things. But now he's an old man. I mean, no offense, somebody's probably in his 50s or 60s, and I'm older too, but he's not as in touch, and all he's doing whenever you hear him come up with ideas is rehash stuff from his youth. And no offense to Jim Cornette, a lot of his ideas are rehashing things he liked when he was younger. When I talk about ideas, things I liked when I was younger. I don't think that Vince Russo today would be as effective of a writer. But I think for the era that he was in charge, head writer, WWE, 97 through 99, he was the exact right guy. You're right, he had a great talent base, great group of people. He had everything around him. Everything was firing perfectly. And, yeah, it was great to end some of those trash gimmicks that were going on, the TL Hoppers and the Max Moons and the Aldo Montoyas, and some of the things they did with several gimmicks that they did with Al Snow were horrible. But he couldn't do it now. But when he was in his prime and in touch with pop culture, I don't think there was anyone better.
So my stance on this debate was more, Vince Russo, are you for or against him? And your stance is he was the greatest writer of all time. You mentioned when he came back in 2002. I try not to make it personal, but, let's not ignore the fact that he left unprofessionally both times. The first time he left, he negotiated his deal with WCW and left without giving a heads up, and he left like a thief in the night the second time. I will close out my argument with the basis of your stance.
Okay.
Paul Heyman is the greatest wrestling writer of all time, bar none. Vince Russo, and you just said it, SnowMan, had the talent, had the era, had the previous hokey stuff to come from. Paul Heyman, in my opinion, is the greatest wrestling writing mind of all time because he worked with nothing. He hid the negatives and accentuated the positives, and look at the things he was able to create with the little engine that could in ECW. Without the funding, without the exposure, without the giant networks to broadcast his work, he created a legacy from dirt. And some would say a legacy of dirt, but you can't deny the ECW chants that to this day are still going on. And no matter how much of a train wreck some of those reunion shows may be, they are still looked upon more positively and with nostalgia, more so than anything Vince Russo has tried to revisit.
Well, you obviously have figured out how to play to my love for Paul Heyman. And my argument, again, was Vince Russo was the most influential writer in WWE history. He's extremely talented. So influential just in how much he reshaped WWE television, going from the new generation to the Attitude Era, going from Max Moon to Stone Cold Steve Austin. I would argue that Paul Heyman, a better idea man, better long-term planner, probably not a writer. I'm not sure for, if you had to have him write scripts, but producer, amazing, and I don't know that anyone here can make an argument against Paul Heyman's overall talent. But, yeah, no, I think I appreciate your input. I would love to hear everybody's stance on this, and I don't think I can make an argument to anybody that Vince Russo is a stellar human because he doesn't always present himself well. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And did you have any final words? And then I have just a couple last-minute statements, and we'll get out of here.
If I could, and SnowMan, you could have Watson edit this part out, but I just wanted to close out and say, guys, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate so much SnowMan reaching out, the channel reaching out and allowing me to be a part of this. I am an independent professional wrestler in the Southeast as well as a trivia host in Central Florida. I love reading the comments. I love reading everybody's feedback and their input. If you guys think of any other debates that you'd like to listen to, that you'd like to submit, please do so because you are the voice of the channel. We just reverberate what you guys want to hear. As SnowMan said, should Owen be in the Hall of Fame? Should Chris Benoit be in the Hall of Fame? I personally have some ideas, such as, do you think Owen would have eventually become WWE Champion? Who was the bigger star? Who do you think had the bigger impact on the business, Hulk Hogan or Stone Cold Steve Austin? Stuff like, do you think guys like Coco Beware and other hokey gimmick like that belong in the Hall of Fame? And finally, who do you think should have been WWE champion that never won the title?
All right. No, that's amazing. Thank you. And, Simon and I have big shoes to fill. As people know, Conrad Thompson, Jim Ross, I was partnered with Jim Ross for 5 years on this channel. We grew this channel. We put his content on here. We got it online. I worked with him with his podcast. He's been an amazing partner. Conrad has made that show enormous, huge growth, and Conrad wanted to launch a Patreon site and adfreeshows.com and all sorts of wonderful things, but it meant that we couldn't continue to put new content of Jim Ross on this channel, so we decided to work with other people. We've reached out to folks like Colt Cabana or even Taz, talking with them about some podcast work, but we also decided that it would be fun and an opportunity to put things like wrestling debates and people watching wrestling for the first time and wrestling news. So thank you for staying there with us. Huge shoes to fill, amazing talents. Conrad and Jim, we are not them. We're not going to try to replace them, but we're hoping to add something fresh and fun to your wrestling diet. And thank you again for joining us. Click like and subscribe if you haven't. Click the notification bell. That means you get new videos, new notifications, everything all the time straight to your inbox. And check out Simon Says, facebook.com/SimonTimeTrivia. That's his trivia show. It's amazing. It's a lot of fun. And look him up if you're ever in Central Florida. His show is amazing. He would love to have you live at one of his trivia shows. Last words?
Just thank you so much to everybody. As Conrad, let me start over. Just thank you so much to everybody. As SnowMan said, we are not Conrad Thompson. We are not Jim Ross. But I hope that you guys feel that this podcast is for the people and by the people who are fans of wrestling just like yourself. So thank you so much for tuning in, guys.
All right. Thanks for watching, and adios, amigos.
And now, let's hear from Kali Muscle with a word about Thinnergy.
Hey, what's up with everybody in the world? This your boy, Kali Muscle. And as you see, I represent muscle and fitness and cuts and striations. You see what I'm saying? And this is a shout out to the team at Thinnergy. You guys are doing a great work, man. Nobody care more about fitness and nutrition than I do. So keep up the good work. It's all about incredible gains and great results. Stay motivated. Love y'all. Let me give you a little more inspiration and motivation. Look at them cuts. Love you. Stay blessed.
So if you want to boost your workout into high gear, try Thinnergy. It's an appetite suppressant and an energy booster. I take it as a pre-workout. Start today and get jacked like the genetic freak Big Kali Muscle. There's an Amazon link below.